When I was a boy growing up in Florida, I used to help my godmother all through the year in her garden. She had this great, big, beautiful garden, and in a lot of ways, I was her hands and her feet in that area. She helped me learn early on how to water a plant. I thought as a kid that I was doing a great job. I was making sure to cover every leaf and stem and branch in a thick coating of water. And then I learned pretty quickly that that's exactly how you kill a plant, especially in the hot Florida sun. If you coat the leaves in water on a clear, hot day, it can actually scorch and kill the plant. What I learned is that the way you water a plant is you water its roots. Because the roots are where it absorbs nutrients and water through the soil. In a new season of life, and this is the first week of the year in 2017, we often like to focus on the new things, the things we don't have yet, the visions that we have, the beautiful, exciting new possibilities. But I think that in the season of winter is often when, instead of focusing on the branches and the leaves and the buds, is when we need to focus on nourishing our roots. Otherwise, we end up like a top-heavy tree with no capacity to grow, a golden palace with no food inside, a grandiose cathedral with nobody inside except for a sleeping priest. We end up with empty slogans on baseball caps and scapegoating campaigns. In a temperate climate like here in the Pacific Northwest, I started learning about how roots really work, and it turns out that deciduous trees do not grow in the winter. They basically go into a state of hibernation, and as the spring arrives, they begin to grow, but first, instead of in the buds, which is always what we see, the first place they grow is in their roots. As the earth warms up, the roots grow millions of tiny little micro hairs that become these furry little roots beneath the soil, and those micro hairs absorb the water and the nutrients from the soil. New roots are the ones that are able to do most of the work. They have the energy to absorb these new things, but it's the old roots that are tough and deep and that provide an anchor to the tree so that it doesn't fall over. Some of these trees have what's called a taproot. And a taproot is the one root that goes way deep down into the center of the soil, the center beneath the plant, and it gives a plant its stability and its strength. Marcus Garvey said about roots that a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Roots are essential if we're going to be strong and weather a difficult storm. Roots are essential as we remember our story. We must know our roots. At Valiant Mountain, we say that we are rooted in grace. I don't think we're alone in that. I think it's part of this great tradition that we find ourselves in. When I try to understand what grace is, I often think about a story in Scripture. It's a story of Jesus getting baptized. In this story, in Mark, he is taken to the water by John the Baptist. He's dunked in the water, and he hears a voice, and the voice says to him that you are beloved. It doesn't say you are beloved because you have done the right things, you've believed the right things, you've spent time with the right people. It simply says you are beloved. And that is what the central message of baptism is. Every sacrament of the church really has the same core idea of grace, that you are beloved. And what's interesting is immediately after he's baptized, Jesus goes off into the wilderness and gets tempted. And I've often found the temptations in the story very strange. When he's tempted to jump off a roof of a building so that angels will catch him. He's tempted to bow down to the devil. He's tempted to turn a stone into a loaf of bread. These don't seem like very tempting things to me. When I think of temptations, I think when most of us do, we think about forbidden desires, pleasures that we're not supposed to have or that we shouldn't have too much of. I had a friend who used to wear a t-shirt. I don't know if it was a joke or not. I think it was. And it was called the Devil's Fishing Rod, and it had a little red man with a fishing rod that had 4 hooks hanging off the various strings, and people walking by and looking up at the bait. And it was a bottle, it was a needle, There was a playing card, which is kind of off after the needle, and had a dancing lady, and it was these forbidden pleasures that, that's what we think of when we think of temptations. But in the story, these aren't forbidden pleasures or desires that we're not supposed to do that are the temptations that Jesus is facing. It's almost as if those forbidden desires are things that are manufactured by the powers that be to keep us aware from the real temptations. The temptations that Jesus faces in this story, which are actually the temptations to prove ourselves. To prove ourselves to be the people that are worthy of love, deserving of being called beloved, to prove that we are powerful, exceptional, influential, special in some way. That seems to me what Jesus is facing off when he is challenged to sort of do these miraculous tricks, to show that he's superior in some way. And I think for so many of us, what we struggle with more than the temptation to do something that we don't believe we ought to do is the temptation to believe that there's something about us that's not good enough. There's something about us that's not right, that isn't beloved, and that we have to prove ourselves to get that love. And grace is directly in opposition to that. I've got a rug, this little kind of probably 2 feet by 3 feet rug at home. It was something I bought when I was 19 years old. I was traveling in Turkey. I was alone. I was on this great big adventure. And it's this Muslim prayer rug. It's beautiful. It's kind of deep burgundy and black and orange and purple. And I've got this in a little place in my house where I pray each morning, most mornings, as many mornings as I can. And this wonderful prayer rug is something I did not want to buy. I was walking down the street in this small town in Turkey, and this guy struck up a conversation with me, and I knew he was a salesman, and I kept saying, I don't want to buy whatever you're selling. 6 hours later, I ended up with this beautiful, gorgeous rug that I treasure to this day. And I remember as he was trying to sell me these rugs, and I kept saying, I legitimately don't want to buy your rug. At one point he said, I promise you that for the rest of your life, you will treasure the rug that you buy today. You will remember this day, and you will be grateful to me for convincing you to buy a rug. And he's actually right. I mean, it's kind of an astounding thing. Because I use this almost every day, and I do treasure it, and it is beautiful. But one of the things that happened as I spent time in this rug shop is I learned a lot about rugs. I actually came back the next day because we became friends during this time, and I spent the entire day in this rug shop watching foreigners coming and buying these rugs from these two amazing salesmen. And I noticed people doing the same thing that I did, because I pointed at the parts of the rug that were imperfect, that were frayed, that were not frayed, but some of the little tassels at the end were longer than others, and the edges weren't perfectly 90-degree angles on the corners, and it wasn't absolutely symmetrical in every way. And I would point to those and say, look, this rug is not perfect, and it should be given at a discount. And all sorts of people were doing that. And what this guy told me was, that's how you know it's real. If you want a rug that's perfect on its corners and everything's exactly uniform, you can do that. You can buy some cheap, manufactured in a machine warehouse rug that in a few years is going to begin falling apart. Or you can buy a rug that's been handmade by people who have been doing this for generations. People who know how to build a lasting and beautiful rug. And of course it'll be imperfect because it's made by human hands. And this rug, to me, is a lot about the story of the rug, the kind of the idea behind it, is a lot about grace. It's a lot about humanity. That it is in our imperfections, in our not being perfect, but being real, that we are valuable, that we are worthwhile, that we are loved. When we think about grace, there's been a lot of teaching in the church or a lot of understanding of grace that I think is just off. And it's kind of these two polarity ideas. One is that we are terrible creatures, totally undeserving of love and actually deserving of contempt. But somehow God loves us, usually through Jesus, and it's kind of blocking us from God's contempt for us. And that this is what grace is that even though we deserve to be hated, we are somehow loved. And then you have this other side of things, which says, actually, we're perfect. We're wonderful in it in every single way, and we're glorious angels. And so we deserve love. We are worthy of love because we're so wonderful. And I think in a lot of ways that both of those camps are missing the mark and telling people things that they don't entirely believe. When I'm told that the more progressive angle is the one that says that we're these kind of perfect angelic beings, and when I'm told that, it makes me feel a little bit nice, but for the most part, it doesn't jive with my actual experience of myself as someone who does struggle with things, who doesn't always treat people the way they should be treated, who doesn't treat myself the way I should be treated, doesn't always treat the earth the way it should be treated, who leaves things undone that ought to be done. And yet what grace says is that the question of earning it, of merit, of worth, is not connected to love. That we are loved just the way we are. Our imperfections, our humanness is part of grace. I think it is kind of perfectly summed up by this poem of Wendell Berry, or it's something that I want to leave you with. It's a short little poem, and it's this. This is a paraphrase. When I rise, let me rise like a bird joyfully. And when I fall, let me fall like a leaf, gracefully and without regret. So friend, when you rise, may you rise with joy. When you fall, may you fall gracefully, without regret. May you embrace the wholeness of yourself, messed up and beautiful. May you surrender to a love that will set you free and that will turn the world upside down. May you find that taproot, that central root that goes way down deep into the earth in your life. And may it give you strength. Amen.